You're listening to The Fan Marillion, an unofficial companion podcast for the Amazon Prime series The Rings of Power. I'm your host, Glorfindoll, reacting to the show each week, and this week I'm lighting the beacons of Amon-Din for Peter Jackson to come and save us. I'm covering The Rings of Power, Episode 7, The Eye. So if you haven't watched it yet, turn back now, because there's going to be a flaming corpse load of spoilers. So what were the highlights on Tolkien's social media this week? Well, for one thing, people either loved or hated that explosive twist with Mount Doom last week. I'll tell you, I took Earth science multiple times in my youth, and I've heard the term pyroclastic flow more times this week than in my entire life. The self-made volcanologists watching at home had a field day with Wikipedia and their keyboards. I had bigger fish to fry last episode and happily suspended disbelief when it comes to volcanology in a magical world. This armchair physicist right here couldn't take her eyes away from the teleportation discourse long enough to give one molten magma mantle about last week's pyroclastic flow. In the growing list of what's wrong, I'm not sure a pyroclastic flow would make my list. Last week. Udun. Last week. When I was giving episodes my highest ratings possible. Handing out stars like Oprah. Last week. When I was so riveted I couldn't even comment on the final moments. I simply made noises. Last week. Ancient memory. Fast forward to today, Episode 7, the penultimate piece for the season. After 4 glasses of wine, I reached the end of the episode at last. I'm thrilled to be able to simply go to sleep, hoping to forget about this milestone. My first 4-glass rating. The first episode to give me a hangover. This is Durin's Bane, not the 2-second clip of the Balrog that was already shown in the Comic-Con trailer. No! Durin's Bane is my hangover from Episode 7. I have certifiable whiplash. This show is all over the place from week to week. Exciting to boorish. Clever to elementary. There and back again, an audience's tale by the whiplashed masses. Every episode feels like it was written by a completely different person. Maybe that's because they were. But here's the quail sauce. A writer's room is a common practice with big-budget shows, so why does this one feel like a writer's room? The magic of the showrunner is that you don't know it's a whole room because they tie the work together before heading to the soundstage. The showrunner is, in theory, the storyteller, and standardizes the team scripts to cement that illusion. What has actually happened is that viewers are on a roller coaster of quality, voices, and decisions that all clash from week to week. Let us go forth. I want to set the scene. Recall, if you will, one of the greatest films ever made, The Two Towers Extended Edition. I applaud nearly all of Peter Jackson's and his writing team's modifications in bringing the Lord of the Rings trilogy to the screen. Changes typically made great sense and showed storytelling skill and insight. Except that cringe right in the middle. Now it's short, and I get over it because the rest of the movie is amazing. But I know that you know exactly to what I refer. I refer to,
he took a little tumble off the cliff. He's dead.
And everyone says prayers and looks sadly over the cliff, and we have to go through a receiving line of characters reacting to this death we know is fake. This melodrama doesn't land because there's no stakes. We know he's alive, and we're just annoyed that the characters aren't doing something more salient to the plot. And we all have to stop and hold a little funeral in our brains for this man who was very much still alive. And then, ha-ha, there he is. He was alive after all, like we knew. And then the receiving line repeats, but this time with characters happy that he's still alive. And we're supposed to manufacture tears and heartwarming feels that he's still alive, but we don't because we knew he was. Yeah, that cringe. It takes me out of the story every time. I just rewatched it last week for the Fan Marillion Two Towers trivia, so it was on the forefront of my mind going into this week's Rings of Power episode. But you know what? Peter Jackson reels me back in after that moment, and then I proceed with the rest of the film and fall in love all over again for the second half, and all is right with the world. So think about that fake-out death from the middle of the Two Towers, and imagine, if you will, that it happens to every Rings of Power character in sequence, a revolving door of fake-outs and unshocking resurrections and red herrings for a full hour and 12 minutes. And you would have Rings of Power Episode 7. I feel like I could just turn off the mic at this point because that's all that needs to be said about Rings of Power Episode 7. No progress in any thread was made. The igniting of a bomb under several storylines pacing last week was sorely squandered and allowed to fizzle down to nothing. I'm sure the showrunners thought they were really doing something here. A sad, soulful recovery episode after those shocking events. But they were not. We open on the fallout from last week's volcanic eruption. The pyrotechnics department did their jobs, at least. We got flaming homes, flaming people, flaming horses? When there was a whole shot of Adar's horse getting up and dusting himself off after that leg-breaking tripping stunt last week. But that was a different director. This episode's director said, "Nah, we keep it real on my production set. Light that whole horse on fire. Let it canter past the camera. We'll pan and follow. Ooh, make it neigh in pain." There were also a lot of deaths in these fires for the humans. If you survived the orc battle, and then survived the second orc battle, and then survived the falling fire rock of the explosion, it was almost assured that you would then die in the pyroclastic whatever the fuck I learned on the internet this week. The handful of Southlanders still alive after all of this should definitely try buying lottery tickets. And that cowardly but good-hearted Númenórean soldier who you thought, he's too plucky to survive the season, has indeed not survived the season. Isildur is missing and presumed dead. The Queen Regent's eyes were burned and now she's blind. And Númenor is heading back to their ships with their tail between their legs. They didn't save the Southlands at all. Most of the Southlanders died, and Númenor sure lost a ton of people too. They're all disheartened, especially Elendil, who wishes he had never saved Galadriel in the first place after ardently defending her all season. Halbrand is now king of 30 people. His future in leadership is looking bleak, as he has no base of operations to turn into a capital city of a kingdom. He has no army, no money, no assets of any kind, just a title and the pendant that allegedly grants it. And the only person that was vouching for him is now blind and also has just left. In addition, any villages within the 1,000 square miles he supposedly is to rule have been self-ruling for many generations, currently pay no tribute or taxes to anyone, and won't be thrilled at the prospect of doing so now for a king who promises to bring absolutely nothing to the table himself. Usually there's a benefit to joining a kingdom or a country, some protection, trade benefits, aid. Halbrand has nothing to offer. But real talk, this show's writing has been so ridiculous so far, it wouldn't shock me at all if at the start of season 2 we were to check in on Halbrand and he's ruling some grand village conglomerate over in future Gondor, which is where they say this episode they're heading. And somehow, I have a feeling that an expert blacksmith by trade and an expert fighter and expert horseback rider is also going to be revealed as an expert in city planning and public works and governorship, and will have built a successful city over on the coast. He will do so with Isildur's help, of course, as Isildur has just been accidentally left behind by his people. But that jives just fine, because one of those Argonath statues will be fashioned after Isildur's likeness. So it appears we're getting the founding of Gondor after all, albeit with wonky timing. At the very end, Queen Regent Miriel vows to return to these shores to continue the fight, and aligns with elves unofficially, because Galadriel does not have the political power to make alliances, so she needs to go win over King Gil-galad. I think we can guess how that will turn out next week, given Gil-galad's general malcontent towards all of those things, and especially given that Gil-galad is very busy trying to keep everyone alive. We've got 4 more seasons until the last alliance, I suspect, so Miriel will have to wait for that reinforcement. Also, I assume the audience was supposed to rally behind Miriel and Halbrand's desire to win back those lands, those charred, actively volcanic lands. But who wants that? Future Gondor seems like the right move they're making. In the way that Airbnb's weather cancellation insurance doesn't involve reasons for hurricanes during hurricane season in hurricane areas, who's supporting this effort to reclaim Mordor, and for what reason? That place is shit now. Anyway, we shouldn't worry about the Númenóreans coming back here next season, because they'll all be dead from the lung cancer that volcanic ash just set into motion before the year is out. Oh, I hate everything. I was really excited about the volcano blast last week. I was! But how its fallout was treated this episode just sucked all my joy out of it. It's gone. And Celeborn happened. Sort of. The lore boys got their wish. Galadriel was married to Celeborn in the First Age, as the canon dictated. Because she tried to go off to Valinor without him in the first episode, I and many others assumed one of 2 things. Either they're going to bring him in later and do a little meet cute and start their romance in the Second Age, or that he already exists, but we're just ignoring him because Galadriel's a jerk. A lot of people vehemently signed on to option 2, which has been annoying to navigate these past 7 weeks, because I was firmly in the camp for option 1. Well, a third option has now been introduced as the show's approach. Celeborn went off to war and didn't come back. Which means Rings of Power Celeborn is in an orc dungeon somewhere. But that means when we meet Celeborn, he'll have been in a dungeon for hundreds, possibly over 1,000 years, possibly 2,000 years. The Second Age timeline is a total ball of twine for this show, so honestly, it could be any of those 3 windows, all of them horrible. Morgoth, Christ, are they going to torture porn our man like that? I can't wait to see the fandom react to the Celeborn twist this week. There are plenty of Silmarillion characters that head to dungeons, and some of them even survive to escape or be rescued, but none of them come out okay. Celeborn is not going to be well adjusted when we meet him, and I just don't know that I'm going to enjoy a Celeborn bring him back from the brink of despair and psychosis sort of love comfort arc for season 2. Especially when I know what happens to another elf who's already central to these story threads, and I don't need double of that flavor of darkness. It's more meaningful when only one character is undergoing, long-term dungeon torture. On the other hand, now that Celeborn is going to look like absolute shit when we meet him, we really could bring back 50-something Martin Sokah from Fellowship of the Ring, might as well. And Martin is a Kiwi. Season 2 is filming in New Zealand. They wouldn't even have to travel him. I'm just saying, make my dream come true, Amazon. The clerics, the big bads, now that Adar and his orcs have won their war in the Southlands. Let's have one more villain right at the end, a villain who's doomed to be flat and uninteresting. Why do I say this with such confidence? Because we've seen them for a total of maybe 2 minutes altogether, simply walking menacingly and gazing purposefully and saying nothing. And there's only one more episode to go, so they're by necessity going to be a Marvel villain. They're going to have no discernible motivations and die immediately. And no one will ever think about them again. And then there's the Harfoots. Gandalf whispering life into the Grove Orchard was wonderful, and the highlight of the episode for me, the only highlight, because it was the only Tolkienish moment in the entire 1 hour and 12 minutes. But then the clerics attack, and Mr. Brandyfoot, after all their food and wagons are burnt, makes this insufferable speech about how sticking together is what the Harfoots do. At their core, they're a loyal, stout-hearted pack. Even though Harfoot leadership and the rest of their clan literally wanted to leave that family behind to die 3 episodes ago for the crime of being inconvenient. Mr. Brandyfoot, with his broken leg, could have ridden on anyone's cart, and some family with a spare teenager could have lent the Brandyfoots a hand in pulling theirs, or the cart could have been left behind and their belongings all divvied up across multiple carts. We're Harfoots and stick together after all, no? No hardship is too much for us to overcome together, no, Mr. Brandyfoot? No, actually. The best case scenario we can think of is leaving you and your whole family of women and children behind to die. And Malva is out here all about saving the stranger now because she's a good person, even though she was the one leading the charge to leave the Brandyfoots behind. Every episode is written by a different person, seemingly without knowing what the other writers are working on. And there's no QC done between them before heading straight onto the soundstage to begin filming. It is unbearable for a show of this scale and budget. The only good part about Khazad-dûm this week was Elrond showing his political acumen with King Durin. I like how he approached his pitch, using his own muddied bloodline to his advantage by setting himself apart from elves at large. Still, it didn't work, as King Durin is simply not interested. I wish the writers had explored that distrust of the premise more, because the premise pitched with absolutely no proof that the elves are dying, just a single diseased leaf, is sus as hell. King Durin was incredibly suspicious that the elves wanted this treasure only a few episodes ago, and that their timing seemed like no accident. So I expected King Durin to lambast his son for being so gullible. So where did that suspicion go? Now King Durin believes them? He just doesn't want to risk dwarven lives mining the mithril at all, which is odd because we already know from the future that plenty of mithril mining did take place, and Frodo's chainmail is the proof. Galadriel's Ring of Power is the proof. So I'm left either confused and wondering if the show is going to break that linkage to the future story, or I'm going to disregard this scene in my mind because it's yet another fake out. I swear, this entire 1 hour and 12 minutes has the stakes of a season of Kenobi, so 0. Am I supposed to be nervous that known outcomes might not happen? I'm not exactly biting my nails here. Like, I know the mithril gets mined, King Durin, and I know the elves live, Gil-galad. This all feels so forced, and I can't wait for next week because that means the writers can put this ridiculous mithril, Silmaril, save the elves plot to bed and start forging. Seal up the mine, King Durin. Fine, I dare you. One of the highlights of the show to me, as I've said all along, is Durin and Disa. However, this episode, their story thread really tested that endurance. Durin is a weepy mess the entire time with this over-the-top love bombing for Elrond when they haven't spoken in 20 years. Can you imagine feeling this way about someone you were friends with in middle school who you just met for drinks last week to reconnect 20 years later? He's my brother! Oh, God. He could just take the humanitarian approach that he takes later with his father. It doesn't need to be, I love Elrond. Like, nuance is allowed and encouraged. I did like the highly charged fight between Prince Durin and his father, King Durin. That was quality, but again, doesn't feel warranted as is. The fight would make more sense if King Durin's position were based off distrust of the elves' intentions, rather than just assuming they're telling the truth and just not being willing to let them come in and walk down to the mine and set out sun chairs and put those reflector boards on their chests and, like, soak up some mithril rays. That seems like a pretty low-impact offer in exchange for 5 centuries of free, highly desirable trade items. And as Disa notes, all of the other lords were like, yes, 5 centuries of free, highly desirable trade items. Let's do it. But again, none of this is included as salient points during the fight, so it just feels like more manufactured melodrama. There were points laid out for the taking. This fight could have contributed to audience investment with this story, but no, melodrama is easier than generating real, believable drama that hits the good spots. And we need to talk. Set designers, I have an inquiry for you. Where is Disa's new table? There was a table in the apartment, but it was the same table from episode 2 and 4. It was not the table from Gil-galad's feast. Ahem. This is the Rings of Power's Starbucks cup. No one replaced the table in Disa's apartment after episode 6. Internet, let's talk about #Tablegate. And then there's the moment with the Balrog. He has been hibernating under Khazad-dûm since the First Age. A single leaf falls, and he shoots up, instantly awake and breathing fire. It wasn't all of Prince and King Durin's yelling reverberating through the mineshaft, by the way. No, it was the leaf. We saw the same 2-second clip of the Balrog from the Comic-Con trailer, so at least that's over. But I'll tell you why seeing the Balrog awake this week and spitting fire worries me, because I feel your confusion. I was all in for a Balrog, and he's awake now, so it's like, what's wrong with you? I'll tell you. If he's already awake, that means we could see the cataclysm of Khazad-dûm next week, rather than in Season 5, when it would have impact. If it were being held back, I'd think we would have followed the leaf down the mine shaft and panned over to see the Balrog snoring. But that's not what happened. It woke him up. He's breathing fire now. So, are we doing this now? But we just got to Khazad-dûm in episode 2. And we revisit it, every other episode? So we've been to Khazad-dûm 3 times in total, right? The cataclysm would not have audience impact this soon. I use the term squandering a lot on this podcast. I am really hoping Khazad-dûm is not squandered by Balrogging it the very same season it's introduced. And then there's the end of the episode. Adar tells his orcs to cast off their sun cloaks, for it is dark now under the ash of this active volcano. And you get this text on the screen that says Southlands, and then it shifts in like 90s sizzle font to say Mordor. What a reveal! They've been showing the map all season with that boxy mountain range, and we just saw Mount Doom, but thank you for the reveal, the great explanation. Who was that for? People who know what Mordor is got all the clues, and people who don't know what Mordor is aren't going to get anything out of that rebrand. Meanwhile, since it only took the Númenóreans a day to get over a ridge to find grassy plains and reasonably clean air, Mordor, in quotation marks, is not very large at the moment. After all, Mount Doom is located in the northernmost and easternmost corner of Mordor, so you can't tell me that all of that open land to the south and to the east is covered in ash and darkness now, but the Númenórean encampment next door, on the west side, is not. Unless it all comes down to the wind made Mordor. Let's credit the right natural force here. This geography is whack! Tolkien created his carefully drawn maps and then used them as a Bible as he worked, and that's exactly what gives his stories their economies of scale. This is such a basic idea, and yet the showrunners time and again throw out the map and ignore time and space, while also, in other aspects of the show, worshipping the map. They show it all the time. And the Harfoot storyline very dutifully follows it. So, pick a lane. Are we following these maps or not? Then there's the episode title. Now, so far, the episode titles have been very on point. So I was confused to what this week's title referred. At this point in history, Sauron has a physical form, which is how he gets around and does his dark bidding regarding rings of power. He could not do what he does without a physical form. The eye is his proto-resurgence. You see him trying to take form again in the future in the Hobbit trilogy, while he's hiding in Dol Guldur as the Necromancer. And then again in The Lord of the Rings over the Tower of Barad-dûr. While in that spiritual proto-shape, Sauron is a shell of his former self. So my only conclusion is that this week's episode title was supposed to be foreshadowing and nothing more. Perhaps an allusion to the loss of Miriel's sight, but again, nothing really to do with the content of this week's episode. Very confusing title. Oh, I guess we'll talk about where things go in Middle-earth from here on the next episode of the Fan Marillion, which will be covering the season finale of Rings of Power. Valar help us. And now this week's trivia question. Is Halbrand Sauron? No! There is absolutely no reason that the entire internet should think this so fervently. Why can't I escape this fervent belief in every forum, every post, every discussion thread, every chat, every meme? Apparently, all you need to be Sauron these days on the internet is a sassy demeanor and the knowledge of blacksmithing. Can you tell I'm fucking done? My trivia segment has fallen to pieces. Thank you to everyone who joined us on Twitch TV on Thursday for Fan Marillion's Tolkien Trivia, where we played questions for the Two Towers and crowned yet another lore head. My Twitch TV trivia effort has not gone to shit, by the way, because I do it on Thursdays and not immediately after I watch a horrible episode of Rings of Power that poisons my mind, and also I'm not fucking drunk for it. Join us on Twitch every Thursday before the episode at 9 o'clock Eastern Time. We'll pregame together and help you stay awake for the Rings of Power episode drop. Next week's trivia theme will be Return of the King. This includes the novel, the Jackson film, and the Rankin Bass animation. And what a righteous topic for our Trivia's season finale to coincide with the Rings of Power's season finale. If you even want to stay awake for it after this week's Amazon shit show, come play trivia with us and then go to bed. Whatever. I don't care. That'd be fine too. And now for our vocab segment. I really thought I would be adding something to the audience experience by doing a vocab segment on my podcast. My boy Elrond does one on Rings of Power every week that Khazad Doom's on screen. And I chuckle because I say to myself, I could just take Elrond's vocab segment every time. And I'm so hungover from this 4-glass episode that I'm thinking, fuck it, let's do that this week. Elrond taught us Namarie, which is an Elvish goodbye. It means be well. What's particular about it is that it's Quenya, which is that ancient High Elven language from the elves across the sea that is very gauche in Middle-earth. It's what the older elves speak amongst themselves, of which Elrond is not a member. He was born later in Middle-earth. Therefore, there was a beauty and old-worldness and depth to that goodbye in the first Elvish language that felt like it was on behalf of the entire race, not simply Elrond's goodbye to his friend. On his behalf, that was beautiful. Although the way these writers are operating, I wouldn't be surprised if the choice was purely coincidental, and I'm giving them credit for reasoning that's not there. Why do I say that? Well, there's a whole song by Galadriel in The Lord of the Rings titled Namarie, making it a very common vocab choice in fanfiction. You read any Tolkien fanfic involving elves, and you've got a 50-50 shot of seeing the word Namarie used as dialogue. And Galadriel, being from the Old World and who spoke Quenya as a first language, would have used it without any special meaning attached, whereas Elrond, a Sindarin speaker from Middle-earth, would not. So, on purpose or accident, the jury's out, and I'm too hungover to care. I'm Glorfindoll, and this was my show. I welcome your opinion, but remember, I'm not the fandom. I'm just a fan. Join the conversation at Fan Marillion on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and Twitch TV. Or for flaming that's too spicy for socials, send me an email at fanmarillion@gmail.com. Please subscribe, rate, and review this podcast wherever you get your podcasts.
This has been an Opus Nox Media production. Produced and edited by Ali Bachman. For more information on Opus Nox Media, please visit opusnoxmedia.com.